With all of the focus centered around the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, there has been a renewed interest in how the late sex offender, who was once a teacher at New York City's prestigious Dalton School, accumulated his massive wealth and ended up in circles with high-profile figures and orchestrated a vast sex trafficking operation. Now, 2 investigations by the New York Times unpack Epstein's rise to prominence, including one on how the college dropout got so rich. In it, Epstein is described as, quote, a relentless scammer. He abused expense accounts, engineered inside deals, and demonstrated a remarkable knack for separating seemingly sophisticated investors and businessmen from their money. He started small, testing his tactics and seeing what he could get away with. The other reporting reveals the very close relationship between Epstein and President Trump, especially their time chasing women together, writing, quote, with other men, Mr. Epstein might discuss tax shelters, international affairs, or neuroscience. With Mr. Trump, he talked about sex. Joining us now are 2 of the New York Times investigative reporters behind those investigations. Steve Eder, who was one of the bylines for the Epstein finances piece. He's been investigating Epstein since 2019. And Nick Confessore, who was one of the bylines for the Trump-Epstein friendship story, is also here. So I'm very excited to have both of you here because the Times just crushed it this week between these 2 pieces and the cumulative story that it told. And I guess, Steve, I'm going to start out with you because the finances surrounding Epstein have always been the most mysterious part of his existence. And it's what enabled him to be such a predator too, the money he used to get away with it. How did he get away with fooling and swindling so many savvy, high-profile New York City finance operators and then mega businessmen like Lex Wexner?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for the compliments on our week of coverage on this. I think it goes all the way back, like you said. It goes back to the 70s, and just he tried to almost test what he could get away with, and kind of went up a ladder in a way of trying to go big name after big name, showing off an affiliation with the Rockefellers, for example, David Rockefeller, and then trading that to trade it up and keeping it on his resume. Kind of one thing would lead to the next, and people would buy it. He had a type of charisma and a type of way with people that he could fool them.
Was there ever a moment where in your reporting there was either a moment where he kind of switched, where he went from being this kind of like tangential or kind of in the shadowy type person to suddenly becoming mainstream in the very inner circle that you can point to and say this was the moment that you realized that Jeffrey Epstein had arrived on the scene with all these people? And was there ever anyone in these circles who looked at him and said, this guy's phony, this guy's a fraud?
Sure. Well, great question. I mean, I think if you look at the rise, I think he operated more behind the scenes probably in the 70s and 80s for the most part. But he had some affiliations for sure. It's in the 90s, I think in the early 90s where you start to see it. He solidifies his connection with Leslie Wexner in that period, starts to see some real money coming into his accounts, and starts to get the property, the planes, the status symbols. And then sure, I think in our reporting you certainly see a trail of people that he kind of left behind that were, bitten by his scams and so, but nothing that ever, sort of did him in back then. He kind of kept rising.
Nick, we heard earlier from the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, that the relationship here between the president and Epstein was basically playboys. But you've reported on this extensively. Is it more complicated than that?
It's much more complicated. First of all, playboys is a polite way to put it. These 2 men were chasing women and chasing sex all the time. That was the basis of their friendship. When they got on the phone, they talked about who they had sex with and where. They would trade modeling cards. They forged relationships with modeling agencies to get more access to women. And they threw parties at which certain women had made accusations of sexual assault and abuse. Now, that's separate from saying that Donald Trump was implicated in Epstein's crimes and his trafficking. But it's also a long way away from a purely wholesome relationship. Their shared hobby wasn't golf. It was pursuing women and getting laid.
Steve, I'm curious. You've talked about this charisma that Jeffrey Epstein had. Your reporting suggests that he was really good at managing up, right? He was really good at sucking up to his bosses to get more opportunities to swindle in many cases or abuse his expense reports. When I've seen the video footage of Epstein, he comes off as really creepy, I have to say. So I don't know if it's a gendered thing or what, but I'm curious if you could kind of give us a little more color about how it was that he was able to charm people, given that, again, what little video documentary footage I have seen of him, really gives me the heebie-jeebies. So,
did he also swindle any women, by the way? Like, were there any women that were part of his that he consulted with? And
Sure. Yeah. I know. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if charisma is the right word. I mean, that's something we certainly heard, in the reporting, was that he had a way of talking, sort of in a nature of being able to go and approach anybody about anything, call anybody and bring up any subject, and this curiosity to him that attracted some people. So, you're right. I mean, he's gross and it's creepy for sure. But I think he had a way of being able to kind of convince and connive. He had that personality where he could get inside. And in terms of on women, yeah, certainly, Libet Johnson was among them from the Johnson family, was one of his, his people that he advised at a time. And certainly that was part of what he did.
Well, one of the interesting things to Catherine's point that I thought about while reading actually really both of your pieces, was when you listen to survivors talk about Epstein or even women who've survived similar sex trafficking related abuse or sex abuse cases, they talk about the men often as having sort of two personalities. So there is this very charming, incredible, engaging person who reels them into whatever the operation or the thing or the relationship is. But then they do have this creepy and frightening side that or mask that sort of pops out at times. Yeah. And I'm curious if there are patterns you saw in his financial dealings, sort of the way he presented himself in the workplace, that benefited him, I guess, in the sort of sex and sort of illicit side of his social life.
Well, they're actually intertwined, I would say, right? He, first of all, had an unerring instinct for young women who were a bit broken, who came from troubled homes, who had suffered abuse and trauma in the past. And he would come to them and be attentive and kind and offer them money and help with their careers. He would listen to them, and then he would turn it on and abuse them. And so many of the women, if you look at their histories and talk to them, they just have these histories of abuse and trauma in their lives, and it made them good targets, and they found so many of them. He used the money and the connections to then help with the abuse. He loved to brag about his famous friends. He loved to brag about Trump. He would put Trump on the speakerphone. And that was part of making clear to the women and the girls that he was powerful and well-connected, and if they said anything or went to the police, it would be dangerous for them. So it was all connected.
Well, and Steve, one thing I want to go back to, though, is what he did. It's insane to me that this man that no one really knows what he did, to have multiple jets, to have this lifestyle, to have the millions, and the excuse that he was helping billionaires with their tax shelters just doesn't really add up at the end of the day. And it couldn't have just all been swindling. So what's your best simple explanation for the cash flow, if you have one? I'm sorry, but
it's a long discussion. But
I think it wasn't like a Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme that he was running. That's how he accumulated.
No, I mean, he had a couple major clients, over the course of the years, and we wrote a piece on Leon Black, as well, another later client, and then Leslie Wexner. Those are kind of the two main clients over the years that we know about, and it created opportunities for Jeffrey Epstein, I think to obtain some immense wealth in the properties and things that we see. There's probably more to it, and there's more to discuss, but that's kind of the quick answer, at least of the last few decades.
And feel free to say no to this, but did you ever come across any blackmailing, any evidence that he blackmailed these clients to accumulate this wealth? Or any suggestions of such?
I mean, look, certainly the rumors, the discussion,
right.
There's so much skepticism about what Epstein did. I don't know that we found a clear case of a blackmail.
But the two of you have traveled extensively to do this reporting. Mm-hmm. Are there people out there who know and have connections to Epstein and this network who are still afraid to talk?
There are definitely people that I've spoken to who are too afraid to talk publicly or on the record, or even at all to have their material in the newspaper. They're terrified. I've really never encountered this amount of fear to even return a phone call, to even respond to an email. People go dark immediately.
Wait, what are they afraid of, just to clarify?
Yeah.
Like they're just afraid of the stigma of being associated with Epstein, or something more?
They're afraid of being sued. They're afraid that the president's supporters might target them. A group of survivors came out a few weeks ago, I believe, and said that they've been subject to death threats. All for asking the government to release files and show transparency.
And you can see a difference. I've been reporting on this story off and on for 6 years, and even from 2019 to now, just the toxicity, around this and having any connection to it, and it can be very hard to get people to return a call.
Really quickly, just with both of you, what's the most surprising thing you learned in this latest round of deep, immersive reporting that you did.
I wouldn't call it a surprise, really, but the police report, the FBI report, I think that Maria Farmer submitted, that she's been talking about for years, and she got gaslit, and the DOJ wouldn't say it existed. And she said, no, I went to the cops, I went to the authorities in the 90s and reported this guy for child porn. We now know it exists. She was right. She was vindicated.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, I think, probably what I would have said as well. Not a whole lot surprising. I mean, I think in terms of what we've seen in the last 36 hours since we started looking at it, however long it's been.
Let me ask you finally, as two journalists, what questions do you have that you want to pursue going forward?
I mean, I'm certainly still interested in the money and trying to learn. I mean, I feel like You
think financial institutions have answered for how this money moved around the financial system clearly and accurately so far?
I think journalists have tried, and others have tried to get at that. Yeah. I still think there's a fuller accounting, to be done. And I think certainly through our magazine piece at the New York Times, we got, several steps there and other stories that we've done. But I still feel like there's more to be learned, and we're looking forward to getting at that.
In this first round of releases, there are a lot of redacted faces in those pictures. There's a lot of men's faces that have been redacted. I'm curious to find out what more we can learn about other men that these women were trafficked to by Epstein.
All right. Nick Confessori, Steve Eater, thank you so much for the brilliant reporting, and hopefully we'll have you back as you continue to do this important work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Begin this hour with a lame duck president choosing to defy not only presidential norms, but also U.S. law, with an administration and a major political party unwilling to do anything about it. Just this week, we have seen this play out in ways big and small, like Donald Trump deciding to flout established law, the law, to have the Kennedy Center also bear his name on a memorial. There is the escalation of deadly strikes on alleged drug boats in the Eastern Pacific that appear to not only have been a violation of DOD's own laws of war, but also what UN experts are calling extrajudicial executions. There is the ongoing interference in the health of children across this country as Trump gives Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. free rein to enact an anti-vaccine policy with a plan in the works right now to stop recommending most childhood vaccines. And at every turn, we are seeing an administration that is running cover for his actions and a Republican Party that, by and large, is sitting by like that unbothered dog in the middle of a burning room saying, this is fine. Joining us now, Norm Eisen, founder and executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund and former special counsel and special assistant to President Obama. Norm, as always, thank you for coming to the weekend. So let's use the example of the Kennedy Center. There is a law on the books that says you can't change the name. You can't do any of this, what we saw this week. They knew that. The president knew that. His administration knew that. The Kennedy Center board that he remade in his image knew that.
His wife and his chief of staff.
Right. And yet, the board does this vote to change the name, and then the very next day, the letters show up, and they're pounded into the side of a memorial to a slain president. At what point will, I don't know, anybody stop this president from flouting the law, whether it's at the Kennedy Center or ignoring a judge's order to not deport people to Venezuela or to turn the planes around? Norm. Yeah, that's a question, Norm. I'm done with my rant.
I thought something else was going to come after Norm. Well, look, it has been a presidency that has violated laws and norms more than any other in modern American history, probably in American history, but as a norm, if I may say so, the norms and laws have pushed back. The democracy movement, and at Democracy Defenders Fund, we're very proud to be a part of that, has gone to court to fight this president hundreds of times, over 500 times. We alone at Democracy Defenders Fund have over 237 legal cases and matters. And guess what? We have won time and time again in court and stopped the president's bad behavior, whether it was litigating against Doge. We got that first order pushing Musk and Doge out of all of our data at the Treasury Department. Guess what? Musk is out of Washington. Doge, the government says there is no more Doge. Donald Trump tried to tear down birthright citizenship. Every baby, we got an injunction on that. He tried to take over elections. We stopped him there. He tried to close down government agencies, fire every AmeriCorps kid. We got every AmeriCorps kid rehired. He put his cronies in. I'm almost done. He put his cronies in to prosecute innocent people. We brought the first case saying, you can't do that. Alina Habba, New Jersey, pushed out. That same theory was used to shut down the James and Comey cases, where we also filed a brief. So the pushback has been strong. And as I sit here now, he's going to get strong pushback on this Kennedy Center atrocity. It's a terrible desecration of the memory of John Kennedy.
Can I just push back on? There are a couple of things I wanted to push back on, because it's great that you're in court and you're pushing back and you've gotten some victories. But there's a case at the Supreme Court on birthright citizenship. I mean, with this court, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. So.
That's our case, and I think we have. You can guess any scandal. They sent me a list of the Trump scandals before I came on, and I'm like, check case, check case. That's our case, birthright citizenship. Let's take that example, Jonathan. The case, the birthright issue went up once. We filed the very first case with wonderful partners. We always do these cases. We do it as a movement. You know why? Meet, shock, and awe with rule of law flood the zone.
How long have you been practicing
that? Usually I say, meet Trump, flood the zone with rule of law, shock, and awe, but I switched it up for you guys.
Yeah.
I want to bring the fresh material.
Norm, I want to continue, though, on the pushback train, because there is one other policy area in particular that the courts have not been able to curb executive power in any way so far. That's led to, I think, over 100 deaths due to these strikes in Venezuela that a lot of critics are saying amount to extrajudicial murder. Yesterday, I spent the day trying to figure out the basis for why the U.S. government has been allowed to board tankers. There was news that broke yesterday that, as Kristi Noem said on X, that they had apprehended another ship. There's these very vivid images of that were described in newspaper reporting about this, of U.S. Forces repelling, helicoptering down onto this Venezuelan tanker. International law states that if a ship is boarded, that there needs to be reasonable grounds to believe it's not legitimately registered to the state whose flag it's flying. But a U.S. official told the New York Times that the Coast Guard had not yet determined and was trying to determine if this tanker called the Century's Panama registration was valid. I mean, what is the chain of command supposed to look like before you go and do something like that? And is there even a legal basis and any reason to believe, even if that this is legal, even if there was some sort of reasonable grounds here? Why are we doing this?
We know from prior violations in the international arena that a president's powers are at their high water mark. But they're not unlimited. We also worked on the deportation of the Venezuelans. We brought the very first accountability case. We're going to sue. We brought that very first case for an innocent, illegally deported Venezuelan. And here, history teaches us there will be accountability for the wrongdoing, Jackie. Look at the arc on the torture memos. They were initially promulgated. One of the things that we do at Democracy Defenders Fund is, if nobody's filling those gaps, we do. And we noticed The golden shield that is allowing all of this to happen is the lawyers. There are some lawyers in the Justice Department who are saying, oh, it's legal, go ahead and do it. So we have filed the first ethics complaint on those lawyers, and we're going to pursue that to the ends of the earth. And there was a serious torture memo investigation. For sure the same here, particularly the killings. The boardings are bad, but the experts of every party say it's murder.
No, I hear you, and I'm, the Democracy Coalition, and it feels like in the last few months, a lot more people are speaking out in ways that they weren't at the very beginning, right? Y'all were very alone early on. But I want to play something that Donald Trump said to Kristen Welker on May 4th, because I think it is very, so every once in a while he lets you into his head in a real way. Let's play that.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. It seems to me, and something I don't know that I was aware of, is that for this, or maybe I took for granted, for this country to work and for the rule of law to matter and for the kind of work and accountability that you're talking about to actually have an impact, the person on the other end of that accountability has to believe that their job is to uphold the Constitution of the United States. When that is not the case, it feels like we're just like in a chaos situation. And beyond chaos, like a constitutional crisis situation. This is the president of the United States while he's president, not while he's running as a candidate, saying he doesn't know if he has to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president. I don't that's crazy.
This is a long-running conversation that we have been having, the four of us, all year long. And the vision of America, for all the flaws in that vision, we've never achieved truly the American idea, but the vision was that someday a tyrant would seize executive power under Article 2 of the Constitution. And the founders and framers built in guardrails. Article 1, Congress is supposed to be a guardrail, and now we're starting to see a little bit of life. Epstein, we're litigating that also. We're starting to see a little bit of life in Congress. They failed. The majority party.
I was going to say those guardrails are made of Jell-O.
was going to jump out of that velvet jacket if I didn't qualify. Yes. The majority party has, for the most part, failed. But guardrail, discharge petition. We saw it on health care, too. Republicans breaking. The big guardrail that has worked well, 3. Number 1, Article 3, the judiciary. Over 200 times those federal judges have smacked Donald Trump down, and only a small number go to the Supreme Court. And we've won at the Supreme Court, too. So 90% of those are being upheld. The second guardrail, people don't always think of it because of the 3 branches, but there's kind of a 4th branch in our federalism. That's the state. And look at those marvelous state AGs and governors who've spoken out. They've been very active in court and in the court of public opinion. And that brings me to the 3rd guardrail that ultimately the founders and framers counted on, and that's the American people. Yeah. Look at how unpopular Donald Trump is, and look at the wipeout, November 4.
Yeah. Norm Eisen, always with his list and numbers and cases.
Famous people.
Thank you so much for coming on this morning.
President Trump's again facing criticism for what's become a remarkably common occurrence for him lately, attacking and insulting women reporters. These aren't your typical fake news enemy of the people attacks. His insults are getting remarkably personal and vicious, attacking the intelligence and the appearance of these journalists. Most recently, it was NBC News' Yamiche Alcindor. The exchange happened as the president took questions in the Oval Office about a week ago. Initially, Alcindor asked Trump about Venezuela and if he intended to claim more oil assets from the country, which is a reasonable question given the ongoing tensions in the region. A couple of minutes later, she attempted to ask the president another question, only to get this response.
No, wait. You have to be nice and easy. Nice and easy. She's very aggressive. Okay, please.
If you couldn't hear what he said, yeah, nice and easy. She's very aggressive. Trump's remarks weren't just dismissive. He attacked Alcindor with an insult that is historically a racial stereotype for black Americans, particularly black women who speak assertively. A few days before that, Trump had a terse exchange with ABC's Rachel Scott after she asked Trump about whether he would direct the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to release video of a controversial second strike on a boat in the Caribbean.
Are you committing to releasing the full video?
Didn't I just tell you that?
You said that it was
You're
up
the
to
most
Secretary Hegseth.
obnoxious reporter in the whole place. Let me just tell you, you are an obnoxious, actually a terrible reporter, and it's always the same thing with you.
Starting to get a sense here. When Trump is asked a question he doesn't like about a topic that is the sort of a source of political pressure to his administration, he seems to deflect. And when that doesn't work, personal attacks replace answers. And it's worth underscoring this point. These questions he's been asked, they're not out of bounds. They're exactly the type of questions that you would expect a journalist to ask to hold power to account. In the past 2 months alone, Trump has called women reporters insults ranging from stupid to obnoxious and terrible.
It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing.
Why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let him in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?
Mr. President, why wait for Congress to release the Epstein files? Why not just do it now?
You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question.
Is there something incriminating in the files, sir?
Quiet piggy. The president's niece, Mary Trump, has weighed in on why she believes her uncle's attacks may be intensifying and what they may reveal.
His misogynistic attacks against reporters in particular are increasing, and that means a couple of things. It means that he's increasingly comfortable lodging such attacks, but I think it's also a sign that he's a little rattled. Because why? He's also clearly never heard of the Streisand effect. When you call attention to the thing you want people to ignore. It's probably a terrible idea.
And that's where I start with this. Donald Trump has a long history of misogyny, especially when challenged by women. But we're seeing something now that feels more defensive, lashing out in almost schoolyard fashion to avoid answering real legitimate questions from journalists who are doing their jobs. As the old proverb goes, a hit dog will holler. We can just take as much from the president's answers as we can from the questions that he tries to avoid. Hi, joining me now, April Ryan, Washington, D.C. bureau chief, White House correspondent, and an MS Now contributor, and Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, and the host of Mary Trump Media on YouTube. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. April, here's the thing. I just delivered a long treatise on what Donald Trump has been doing with journalists, in particular with women journalists, and that wasn't even a complete picture. In fact, you yourself have personal experience with this.
Yes, I have personal experience. I had personal experience in the first term, and I have personal experience in this term. It's not just the words, it's what they do. The retaliation is real as well. Because of the first term, because of my questioning, as a journalist who's covered many presidents before he came, he did not like the questions. He did not want to answer questions on a community that's still underserved with the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category. And so now, Allie, almost a year into this administration, they refuse to call on me. They refuse to put me in the pool, but I still break news. And that's one thing about being a reporter in Washington, D.C., who does not need a White House. We can go around the White House to find out what's going on. But yes, there is retaliation. And just like Yamiche, it was me, Yamiche, and Abby Phillip the first term. And he has taken his ire out on Yamiche, who is pregnant. And I shouldn't put her personal, because it should not be about us. But it's become a focus on us. His misogyny, his ire against people who question him, and then black women on top of that, Rachel Scott and Yamiche right now, and myself, by him trying to keep me out. But I still have my hard pass, but I pick and choose when I come in.
Mary, I'm curious, because you're also a psychologist. You have two potential solutions here. One is that he's getting very comfortable with who he is, and this is actually who he is. And two is he's getting rattled. I'm more inclined toward the second, because when you combine it with his Oval Office speech the other day, which seemed rattled, where he was lecturing everybody about the economy and prices. But give me a little more on this, because you think about this more than I do, and you know him better than most people.
Sure. I think it's obvious, or it should be at this point, that Donald is a hardcore misogynist. He was raised in a family of misogynists. And one of the things that has been most troubling over the years is just the casualness with which he expresses his misogyny. And one of the earliest examples of that was when April Ryan asked him a question, and Donald suggested that she should set up a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus, as if that's her job. Her job, as she said, is to be a journalist.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, well, exactly. The misogyny was, you're a woman, set up the meeting, and then the casual racism of, well, you're Black, so of course you would be able to set up a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus. So it's been that way since the beginning. So I think one of the reasons, as you mentioned, it's increasing is because it's who he is. And just as Donald has always given other people permission to be their worst selves, by his getting no pushback whatsoever, he's feeling more and more comfortable being his worst self. But then we get to the second point, which is he is terrified. He knows that his poll numbers are terrible. He knows that his policies are unpopular. He's increasingly unpopular. He knows on some deep level that he is losing his cognitive abilities at an alarming rate, and he lashes out. He does not understand how to contain himself. And if anybody, especially a woman of color, challenges him, he will lash out in a way to discharge some of that tension for him. But as April pointed out, to put that person in danger. When you have the president of the United States, not just insulting reporters, but threatening their livelihood simply because they're doing their jobs, we are in a very bad place, and nobody's pushing back.
April?
You know, Mary's absolutely right. It's not just their livelihoods, it's their lives, Mary, as well. You know, I've had the bomb squad at my house. I had a Caesar Sayat bomb. I've had people wait for me outside the White House. It's dangerous. And what reporters are not saying, because I sit in a different space, I tell it to save my life. And those reporters who are on the job, their jobs are not allowing them to be the story. But by the grace of God, I'm here to be able to say, when he puts his mouth on you, to say those awful things, the hate that comes in, the fear behind it. There's still, even with his poll numbers in the 30%, the lower 30 percentile range, there's still that contingent that believes in him and hates us. And what they don't understand is we are more patriotic than they ever understand, because we are built into the First Amendment, our white founding fathers put into place, and we are respecting and responding to that. Freedom of the press.
Mary, April, Donald Trump is not polling particularly well with women right now. How does this reflect? Because we can all see this with our eyes, the things he says. It's not just the words. If you read this in an article, it's very different than seeing the video and the vitriol coming out of Donald Trump when he targets reporters, particularly women reporters, particularly black women reporters. This can't. How do you think this plays in America?
Well, it's one thing to hear it once or twice, but it's over and over and over again. It's repetition, and it's being drummed into our head by the president himself, who denies this. What is it? Look at what I do, not what I say. And I mean, it's over and over again. He says, oh, I'm a friend to women, but yet you call people piggy, ugly, stupid, obnoxious, etc. Who are you as a man? He objectifies women. He believes we're less than. And it just goes to show that this president is tone deaf to a large base of people who vote. In the first term, a lot of women, particularly white women, voted the pocketbook of their husbands when they voted for him. But the question is, what happens when he needs support from women now? He's going to fall on a lot of deaf ears.
In that list of insults we just put up, November 18th stands out to me, Mary, because it's unusual. He said he called a reporter insubordinate, kind of giving the game away there, right? No reporter is accountable to the President of the United States.
I agree with you. That was chilling, actually, because that is Donald's view of reporters. Right. Reporters are not there, in his view, to get the facts or to educate the American people. They are there simply to prop him up and to present everything he does in a positive light. And, you know, those insults are the kinds of things I heard around the dinner table at my grandparents' house growing up, but it is an entirely different thing when it is the President of the United States. And we look at those approval ratings, and luckily his disapproval rating among women is rising, but it's 38% of women still supporting him is way too high a number. And I think that one issue we can't lose sight of is that this is bred into the bones of the United States of America. This is still a deeply misogynistic country. And that is why we are saddled with a misogynist in the White House like Donald Trump.
We have Jess Michaels, an Epstein survivor, and now an advocate for transparency and accountability. Jess, welcome. So, 2 days now past this deadline, and despite an act of Congress, the DOJ has still not released all the documents victims and lawmakers have pushed for by law. Are you buying that missing documents explanation? And overall, how are you feeling right now about it?
First of all, thank you for having me back, Alex. It's always nice to talk with you about this. I'm feeling a million different emotions. One of them, which is very odd, is I'm feeling validated in that the exact level of negligence, to be generous, incompetence, again, to be generous, that has happened for this deadline. It wasn't the beginning of a rollout, December 19th. It was a deadline. And the American people and Congress are experiencing exactly what we've been experiencing for 30 years. So there's this frustration, but also it's in plain sight for everyone to see and to understand what we've been experiencing all this time.
Yeah, I guess there is a sense of validation to that. So let's talk about the few disclosures that were big ones, but there was this one, an FBI report documenting a child pornography complaint against Epstein by Maria Farmer, an artist, an Epstein survivor. This was from 1996. It was a complaint that was ignored for years. Her sister Annie described finding out the document was in the release. Take a listen.
It described Epstein stealing photos of myself at the age of 16, of my younger sister, who was 12 at the time. And just to see it in writing and to know that they had this document this entire time, and how many people were harmed after that date. It just, you know, we've been saying it over and over, but to see it in black and white that way has been very emotional.
It's gut-wrenching, in fact. But is this another level of indication that you were hoping would come out of the DOJ's Epstein files?
Yes, because Maria Farmer was the original whistleblower on all of this. And she has been experiencing an insane level of bullying, being called a liar for years. And she was never lying. She was always telling the truth. And none of us were even told what was going to be in this drop. There was no communication with the DOJ, by the way.
None.
In fact,
nobody reached out.
Ghislaine Maxwell's had more communication with this DOJ than any of us have had.
So the DOJ never reached out to say to you, we just want you to know this will be among the details we are releasing. There was none of that.
We had no idea what Friday was going to look like. We had no idea what to expect. So it was a very emotional, it's not just emotional. It is the tension, the intensity of the day on Friday, waiting and not knowing what was going to happen.
So we know there's more to come. What are you going to be looking for?
Well, I'm still waiting for someone to hold them accountable for for breaking the law on Friday. So that's what I'm looking for first. What I'm also looking for are my statements. I'm very interested in hearing the 2019 tip line. There should be audio messages of many victims that came forward. And the reason I want to hear that is because when I called that 2019 tip line and an officer from the NYPD reached back out and said, you know what, we have to call everyone back after they call, but it was 30 years ago. What do you want us to do about it? And I said, no, you asked me to call you. And so I'm guessing there are a lot of women that were like me that called, that it was a long time ago and they never did anything about. And it was only because I spent a year and a half pursuing the FBI, Southern District of New York, to take a statement, to talk with someone at the FBI, that I finally made a statement.
A year and a half of pursuing that. Here's something of note. It's looked like this across 500 plus pages of redactions in the files released so far. DOJ officials, I mean, guys, it's both sides. It's all of the pages, 500 plus of them, right? DOJ officials say they're protecting victims' privacy. Are you satisfied with that effort? And another question, what do you think is behind these redactions that I'm looking at, and anybody can who looks at it online? And do you worry there is a risk of over-redaction?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't know any victim's name that is a whole line or whole paragraph or a whole page long. I spoke with someone that is an attorney, and they said, you know, things like headlines are redacted, and that doesn't need to be redacted. Times, dates, locations, redacted. Things that were, there are a lot of unnecessary over redactions. And then we have, in addition to that, Alex, we have survivors that's names are now out there because they were poorly redacted. So what I'm seeing is a really sloppy and inconsistent job done by this Department of Justice.
Whose interest do you think the DOJ has in focus as they are responding to the legal requirements to release the documents, Jess?
Well, if it said that the redactions are for victims, and we know that victims' names are not a page long, what's left? Perpetrators.
Let that sit for a moment. So the release of all these photos and documents, it certainly has the potential to re-trigger some trauma for Epstein victims. How are you and other Epstein survivors managing or preparing for what's going to come next?
What I think we're doing a really good job at now to manage what's happening is we're leaning on each other, we're leaning on our support systems, we're letting people know when we're struggling, and that seems to be working. And because I think now this is so public, many of us are surrounded by people that are standing with us, that are silent in the shadows and in our text messages. And I think that that's what's different, because now so much of it is public. It's why there's a validation in what's happening. It's not just us talking about it. It's clearly out for public view.
Yeah. Very much wide consumption of all of this. Jess Michaels, I thank you as always for your time, and I'm sure we'll be staying in touch because this isn't the end of this. Thank you.